Good afternoon, and welcome to the 2024 International Migrants Day celebration in Asia and the Pacific. I thank you for joining us today in Bangkok and online for this important event. Today's occasion offers us an opportunity to recognize the migrants that are central to so much progress and prosperity in our region. International Migrants Day is an opportune date to recommit ourselves to protecting the rights of migrants and strengthening international partnerships and global cooperation for safe, orderly, and regular migration. Before we start, let me provide you with a few housekeeping rules. This event will consist of two parts: the launch of the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024 and a panel discussion that will look towards the forthcoming second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Migration. Our time is limited, so we kindly ask all speakers to be succinct. Time permitting, we'll ask a few participants joining us online for questions and further comments following the panel discussion. We'll be able to invite just a few of you to turn on your camera and microphone to ask a question, and given the overall limitations, we kindly ask online participants to leave remarks in the chat box. We also wish to inform you that this meeting is being recorded and that the recording will be made publicly available after the conclusion of the meeting. We are very honored to have with us today Mr. Paisan Rupanidgit, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, Ms. Armida Salsia Alisjabana, Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, Mr. Iori Kato, Coordinator of the Regional United Nations Network on Migration for Asia and the Pacific, and Regional Director of the International Organization for Migration, Asia and the Pacific. And Ms. Salsabila Rashid, Project Officer, Migration, Youth and Children Platform, Pakistan, is joining us online. I would now like to invite Mr. Paisan Rupanidgit, Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, to open our meeting and deliver his remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Excellency Dr. Armida Salsia Alisjabana, the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Mr. Iori Kato, the Coordinator of Regional UN Network on Migrations and Regional Director of IOM Asia Pacific. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure and honor to join you to commemorate the International Migration Days, to appreciate the contribution of migration to economic and social development worldwide, and recognize challenges and difficulties faced by migrants. Asia Pacific is a region of origins of 1/3 of the global migrants. It is therefore absolutely important to promote safe, orderly, and regular migrations. Different parts of the region have taken a number of concrete actions toward this end. At the regional level, the leader of ASEAN has recently adopted Vientiane Declaration on Skill Mobility, Recognition and Development for Migrant Workers in October this year, to reflect the ASEAN commitment to constantly improve access to skill development and promote better job opportunities for migrant workers in the regions. This is built on the earlier efforts, such as ASEAN Declaration on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Migrant Workers, adopted in 2007, and the ASEAN Declaration on the Rights of Children in the context of migration, adopted in 2019. As irregular movements driven by the conflict and transnational crime syndicates, including human trafficking and smuggling network, continue to put many lives at risk, we have to promote regional and international cooperation to tackle these challenges through all relevant mechanisms. This include, among others, ASEAN meetings on transnational crimes and the Bali process on people smuggling, trafficking in persons, and related transnational crimes, which aim to combat those crimes while providing appropriate assistance and protection to vulnerable migrants. The ASEAN five-point consensus also aimed to pave the way for peaceful solution to the conflict in Myanmar that has caused a significant number of displacement in the regions. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, Thailand is both an origin and a destination country for migrants. Every year, our national abroad contributes to the development of our economy, to remittance and promotion of Thai culture in their host community. At home, we rely on millions of migrant workers to support our agriculture, fisheries, production and services sector. For Thailand, good migration management through the whole of government and the whole of society approaches is absolutely essential. In the past few years, we cooperate with IOM to conduct the reviews of our migration governance index, MGI, to better understand our strength and weakness. A national consultation was organized to raise awareness and to find ways and means to address the remaining gaps. We also volunteer ourselves as one of the GCM champion country to promote the implementation of GCM by sharing our experiences and practices in providing alternatives to detention for migrant children and ensuring access to basic services, particularly health and education for migrants. Thailand is proud to host regional reviews of the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migrations for the Asia Pacific in Bangkok in February next year. We believe that the Asia Pacific Migration Report 2024 that will be launched today will serve as a solid basis for the upcoming regional reviews to discuss regional priorities, challenges, and possibility for collaborations. And last but not least, Thailand wishes to reaffirm our commitments to work with international community and the UN network on migration to continue to promote safe, regular, and orderly migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rupanitgit, for your opening remarks and good wishes. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the United Nations Social, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, to deliver her opening remarks. Ms. Alice Jabana.
A very good afternoon. Excellency Mr. Paisan Rupanigich, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, Mr. Yori Kato, Coordinator of Regional UN Network on Migration for Asia and Pacific, as well as the Regional Director of IOM in Asia and Pacific, Ms. Salsabila Rashid of the Migration Youth and Children Platform, who is joining online. And also I would like to recognize the presence of His Excellency Mr. Fayez Murshid Kazi, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Bangladesh to Thailand, as well as Permanent Representative to ESCAP, members of the regional network, stakeholders, representatives, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of ESCAP, as well as the members of the regional UN Network on Migration for Asia and Pacific, It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 commemoration of International Migrants Day in Asia and the Pacific. This year's theme, honoring the contributions of migrants and respecting their rights, calls on us to recognize the many contributions migrants make to inclusive and sustainable development. At the same time, it reminds us to respect the rights of all migrants, regardless of their nationality, migration status, or other circumstances. Without the respect for the rights of migrants, the promise of migration cannot be fulfilled. This year's commemoration is particularly timely and important since in less than 2 months, ESCAP members and associate members will convene the second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Migration from 4 to 6 February 2025 here in Bangkok. This regional review will inform the 2026 International Migration Review Forum. With over half of the world's population living in Asia and the Pacific and more than 40% of the world's migrants coming from the region, it is important that we identify the regional priorities to be highlighted at the Global Review meeting. For this regional review, ESCAP, in partnership with other members of the regional network, has prepared the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024 to provide a comprehensive assessment of the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration in the region. I would like to thank the members of the regional network for their contributions to the report, providing the evidence base on implementation of this Global Compact. I also would like to recognize the various stakeholders who reviewed the draft report. Distinguished participants, Asia-Pacific offer good practices on safe, orderly, and regular migration. These include, but are not limited to, measures to ensure fair recruitment, provide decent working and living conditions for migrants in several countries and sectors of the economy, create pathways to citizenship and extend humanitarian assistance to migrant workers, irrespective of their migration status. Yet migrants and their families are often left in vulnerable situations. Too often, their rights are not respected, they lack access to services, and they are overcharged when sending money home. Climate change, environmental degradation, poverty, inequality, as well as unsustainable development are driving migration that is not safe, orderly, or regular. To address these challenges, we need people-centered and rights-based policies that promote equity and protect the rights of migrants and their families and reduce vulnerabilities. We need a whole-of-government as well as whole-of-society approach that engages all relevant stakeholders through inclusive and collaborative partnership at all levels. We stand ready to work with member states in partnership with stakeholders to advance safe, orderly, as well as regular international migration in our region. I also hope that the 2024 report that we will launch shortly and the forthcoming regional review will contribute to this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Alice Jabana, for your thoughtful and forward-looking remarks. Now I would like to invite Mr. Iori Kato, Coordinator of the Regional United Nations Network on Migration for Asia and the Pacific, and Regional Director of the International Organization for Migration, Asia and the Pacific, to offer his remarks. Mr. Kato.
Thank you, Madam MC. Honorable Deputy Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the host government of the Kingdom of Thailand, Mr. Payan Lupanichukiji, Honorable Undersecretary of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, ESCAP, Professor Dr. Armida Sarsia Alice Jabana, Ms. Salsabila Rashid from the Migration Youth and Children Platform in Pakistan Connecting Online, representing the stakeholders, Excellencies, distinct delegates from the member states, esteemed representative of development partners, civil society, private sector, academia, and dear colleagues from the United Nations Agency and Migration Network. It is a distinct honor for me to address you on behalf of the Asia-Pacific Regional UN Network on Migration as we launch the 2024 Asia-Pacific Migration Report. My sincere gratitude goes to Madam USG Eva Armida and the entire ESCAP team for organizing this very important event. The launch of the report is timely as we commemorate the International Migrants Day, IMD, the day after tomorrow. The IMD serves as a testament to our collective commitment to fostering safe and dignified migration, acknowledging the contribution that the migrants are making globally, not only December 18th, but every day, in promoting their rights and well-being. Migration is a defining feature of our time, especially in Asia and the Pacific, as it has profoundly shaped the demographic, economic, and social development landscapes of our region. The migration patterns in Asia Pacific are diverse, ranging from labor migration, family reunification, and displacement due to conflicts and disasters. Both the opportunities and complexities presented by these movements compel our coordinated planning and accelerated action. When the world leaders adopted the Pact of the Future back in September, they committed themselves to maximize the positive contribution of migrants to the sustainable development and strengthen international partnership and global cooperation for safe, orderly, and regular migration. The Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration, GCM, offers a comprehensive framework for enhancing such international cooperation on migration. The GCM underscores the importance of respecting the human rights of migrants, addressing the drivers of irregular migration, and fostering safe and dignified migration pathways. As highlighted by the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, in his latest biennium report on the implementation of the GCM launched 2 weeks ago, the Compact has proven invaluable in guiding national and collective approaches to migration governance, including in response to challenges such as climate change, post-pandemic recovery, and accelerating efforts to meet the SDGs. As both Honorable Deputy Permanent Secretary and Madam ES mentioned, member states will gather in ESCAP in early February next year to review the implementation of the Global Compact in the region, fast approaching just 7 weeks from today. The outcome of the regional review will feed into the next International Migration Review Forum, IMRF, in 2026 in New York. Ahead of this major regional event, this Asia-Pacific Migration Report presents a comprehensive assessment by the entire UN system on the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration. This year's report identifies a few areas where the acceleration of our collective efforts is needed. Allow me to highlight just 4 such areas. 1, improving national capacities for effective migration governance. 2, ensuring the protection of migrants' rights and addressing exploitation. And 3, promoting FISA inclusion and harness migrants' contribution to sustainable development. And 4, strengthening partnerships, both international and domestic, among governments, civil society, the private sector, and of course, the migrants themselves. Before I conclude, I'd like to once again extend appreciation and congratulations to ESCAP in collaboration with the Regional UN Network on Migration and other stakeholders on producing this report. Distinguished participants, today let us renew our commitment to continuing to collaborate together and better to ensure that all migrants, irrespective of their migration status, gender, and location, live in safety and dignity, and that we can harness their full potential to contribute to the sustainable development of our Asia and the Pacific region. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kato, for remarks highlighting the achievements and the remaining challenges in Global Compact for Migration implementation in Asia and the Pacific. Finally, I'm pleased to invite Ms. Salsabila Rashid, Project Officer for the Migration, Youth, and Children Platform of Pakistan, to to make her opening remarks. We are particularly pleased to hear from a youth representative at this important meeting. Ms. Rashid is joining us online. Ms. Rashid, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. To all the excellence, distinguished guests, and my fellow advocates, I speak to you today on behalf of the Stakeholder Advisory Group and the Migration Youth and Children platform, MyCP. A platform created by youth for youth with the goal of influencing the highest levels of international migration policy. Migration is not just a concept or a policy discussion for me, it is my story. As someone who has faced the consequences of internal displacement at the age of 12, I have felt the uncertainty of leaving behind everything that was once familiar and the resilience which it takes to rebuild. Migration has shaped not only my identity, but also my purpose. It has fueled my commitment to justice, taught me the value of belonging, and shown me how migration can transform not just the individual lives, but the entire communities. As empowering as migration can be, the absence of right-based governance has left many of us vulnerable. At MyCP, we have identified the key priorities that demand immediate action for children and young people on the move. First and foremost, the access to education that is the cornerstone of empowerment for young migrants and children on the move. It enables integration and strengthens their capacity to contribute to society. Yet the barriers such as luggage, discrimination, and economic hardships persist. We must ensure that the migrants and the migration policy prioritize removing these barriers, giving young people and migrants on the move the opportunities that they need to thrive. Secondly, climate-induced migration. My home, Asia-Pacific region, is at the front line of climate crisis. In Pakistan, we have witnessed the devastating impacts of climate change, and most frequently, the recent floods of 2022 displaced 33 million Pakistanis and left them with no choice but to migrate in search of safety and stability. Similarly, in Asia Pacific, the other countries like Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia are also struggling with the similar climate-related challenges, all of which forced families to abandon their homes. And of course, the young people are often at the heart of these climate-induced migration, yet their voices are rarely heard. So addressing this requires an urgent action that includes involving young people in the climate-induced migration policies, building climate-resilient infrastructure, sustainable livelihood, and international framework that recognizes the climate migrants and protect their rights. Lastly, I would like to emphasize the importance of immigration detention. The harmful practice of immigration detention needs to be end because what happens when the migrants seek safety in the Asia-Pacific region? We all have witnessed it too often. They find themselves behind the bars, treated like criminals simply for seeking a refuge. For children and young people, this practice has a profound effect on their mental health, robbing them of their dignity and hope. Across the region, from Australia to Malaysia, Indonesia to Sri Lanka, young migrants and refugees are subjected to detention, facing isolation and trauma that only deepens the hardships that they had already faced. So, we, the young people of Asia and Pacific, have made it very clear that no child should be imprisoned, no family should be torn apart, especially after being displaced from their homes or in search of a better future. Our region is a home of incredible diversity and opportunity, yet deeply impacted by these challenges. But still, after all these challenges, the young people of Asia Pacific are already leading change. From rebuilding after disasters to advocating for climate justice, we are showing resilience and innovation. What we ask is simple. Recognize our potential, include us in decision making, and work with us to build the solutions. Because we are not the burden, we are the resource. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Rashid, for your profound message of hope and resilience. And thank you to all our opening speakers for your inspiring remarks. Colleagues, this brings us to the end of our opening. I now have the distinct pleasure of inviting Ms. Sabine Henning, Chief of the Sustainable Demographic Transition Section's Social Development Division of UN ESCAP, to the podium to present a summary and recommendations from the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024. Ms. Henning.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, I'm honored to provide a summary of some main findings and recommendations of the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024. Due to time constraints, I will only cover selected points from each chapter of the report. However, the PowerPoint presentation covering all chapters will be posted in its entirety. The report will also be posted later on the ESCAP website. The report builds on previous ESCAP reports going back to 2012. The 2024 version is a UN system-wide assessment of the implementation of the Global Compact for Migration in Asia and the Pacific since 2020. It provides the evidence base for the forthcoming second Asia-Pacific regional review of the Global Compact, which will take place here at ESCAP in February of 2025. 13 United Nations entities contributed and endorsed the report, many of whom are with us in person or online here today. The report was reviewed by experts from government, academia, United Nations entities, international organizations, and non-governmental stakeholders. It focuses on the 23 objectives of the Global Compact and its 10 guiding principles. It covers all ESCAP subregions, countries and areas in Asia and the Pacific. The report has an opening chapter on migration trends, 4 core thematic chapters, and a concluding chapter with overall recommendations. At the outset, let us recognize the sheer geographic scope of the region, as well as its diversity with regard to cultural, political, social, and economic experiences and levels of development. That said, the main message of the report is clear. People migrate for opportunities and in hope for a more secure future for themselves, their families, and communities. They are also often driven by poverty, unsustainable development, discrimination and inequalities, conflict, climate change, environmental degradation, and disasters. Migrants and their families are frequently left behind in terms of development, and they're vulnerable to violations of their rights and dignity. However, when it takes place in a safe, orderly, and regular manner, migration can bring benefits to all, migrants and non-migrants alike. The broader context of migration in Asia and the Pacific is shaped by regional megatrends, demographic shifts, urbanization, climate change, the growth of digital technologies, and rising inequalities. Importantly, 40% of the world's international migrant population lives in the region, and most migration in Asia-Pacific occurs between countries and areas of Asia and the Pacific. Although for some countries and areas in the region, migration to other parts of the world is also important. The first thematic chapter deals with making migration safe, orderly, and regular. In that regard, much has been achieved over the last 4 years. For example, in 2023, the Pacific Regional Framework on Climate Mobility was adopted, ensuring rights-based and people-centered movement in the context of climate change and migration in the Pacific. The 2024 Vientiane Declaration of ASEAN Member States provides a list of measures to enable access to skills, mobility, and recognition among migrants. There are other important global level agreements which have affected the region and are listed on the slide. Through agreements between countries and subregions, there has also been an expansion of regular migration pathways and increased fair, decent, and ethical labor recruitment. The partnership with trade unions and CSOs also has been strengthened. Despite this progress, much remains to be done. The implementation of the 2030 Agenda has fallen behind. Since the Global Compact and the 2030 Agenda are closely related, implementing one or the other facilitates implementation of both. The report calls on improving the evidence base at the nexus between climate change, inequalities, health, and migration. Legal and flexible pathways for safe, orderly, and regular migration at all skilled levels must be expanded, and ILO core conventions ratification must continue. Countries in the region must ensure fair and ethical recruitment and decent work for all. The rights of women migrant workers, especially migrant domestic workers, must be protected. The next thematic chapter focuses on the rights of migrants and their families and on border governance, and reports that work has progressed in these areas. There's evidence that statelessness, for example, has been reduced in several countries. There has been progress in addressing migrant disappearances and death, but both topics remain a major humanitarian and human rights challenge. Smuggling of migrants and trafficking in persons also remain challenges, now often linked to criminality involving online scams and financial fraud. Border situations remain very diverse, with governments working to ensure practical, flexible, secure, efficient, and reliable approaches to migration. Immigration detention, including of children, still occurs across the region. Return and reintegration programs that respect the rights and dignity of migrants have been implemented, but they often remain ad hoc measures. Regarding the recommendations, the report calls for facilitating access for all migrants to civil registration systems and to nationality, identity, and travel documents, ending statelessness, protecting the lives, dignity, and safety of all migrants, increasing the availability of safe, affordable, and accessible regular pathways for migration, reducing the risks of trafficking and other exploitations of migrants, and ensuring rights-based, gender and age-responsive border management agreements. Working towards ending immigration detention remains important. The next thematic chapter deals with migrant protections, integration, and contribution to development. Work to provide consular protection assistance to migrants and their families, for example, is ongoing. The ASEAN Declaration on this topic is an important commitment in this regard. Challenges remain ensuring access to basic services, regardless of status. There are many examples of community-led initiatives to enhance integration of migrants. There are sub-regional processes, such as the Colombo process, and national initiatives that have focused on increasing financial literacy and formalizing the remittance transfer market. There are initiatives to making the transfer of remittances faster, safer, and cheaper, and in fostering financial inclusion of migrants. There are also localized efforts to support implementation of the Global Compact and the 2030 Agenda. Regarding recommendations, the report calls for improving accessibility to consular support for migrants, providing access to services to migrants regardless of status, ensuring migrant inclusion and social cohesion, and supporting local authorities and communities in efforts to achieve social cohesion, supporting diaspora engagement, developing and implementing tailored financial literacy programs, introducing remittance transfer costs, expanding social protection schemes to cover all workers, and ensuring the portability of social security benefits. The final thematic chapter deals with the evidence base, data, narratives, and regional collaboration, and reports improvements in all areas. There are, for example, more pre-employment and pre-departure orientation programs often supported by non-governmental stakeholders, including CSOs and trade unions. They're good practices that counter the spread of incorrect evidence and information and negative attitudes to migrants and xenophobia. There have also been improvements in national, sub-regional, and regional cooperation and partnerships through the work of, for example, the champion countries, the involvement of non-governmental stakeholders, the involvement of the UN network of migration at different levels, the work of RCPs, and the work of various sub-regional forums, such as ASEAN, the Pacific Island Forum, or the Eurasian Economic Union. The report recommends continuing to work towards strengthening capacities and partnerships to improve data collection, analysis, dissemination, and disaggregation. It also calls for protecting migrants in vulnerable situations, avoiding family separation and allowing migrants to reunite with family members, combating all advocacy of hatred, hostility, or violence against migrants, supporting governments and stakeholders in regional, sub-regional, and national cooperation and partnerships, including at local levels, in pursuit of GCM and 2030 Agenda implementation, and ensuring inclusive, intentional, and meaningful engagement of stakeholders at all levels. Ladies and gentlemen, thus far, I have discussed the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024. Let me conclude by previewing the forthcoming second Asia-Pacific Regional Review organized by ESCAP in partnership with the Regional United Nations Network on Migration for Asia and the Pacific. The intergovernmental meeting will take place here at ESCAP from 4 to 6 February 2025. In this context, it is important to remind ourselves of the mandate for the intergovernmental meeting. It is a stateless meeting, it is a state-led meeting, uses intergovernmental measures, and a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach. The objectives of the regional review are clear. First, to take stock of progress. Second, identify key challenges, opportunities, gaps, and emerging issues. Third, discuss regional priorities. Fourth, compile resource requirements, capacity building needs, policy advice, need for data gathering, and so on. And fifth, facilitate the formulation of key findings and recommendations to inform the 2026 International Migration Review Forum. I will leave you with a few reminders to potential participants in the regional review meeting as shown on this last PowerPoint slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Henning, for sharing these powerful outcomes and for your recommendations for moving forward. Colleagues, please find this presentation posted on the meeting website. It is now my great pleasure to invite the main authors of the report to the front for a group photo launching the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024. May I invite the Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Ms. Armida Salcia Alice Jabana, and the Coordinator of the Regional United Nations Network on Migration, Mr. Iori Kato, to join us in front of the rostrum for a photo. Second, may I please ask all members of the Regional UN Network on Migration, panelists, and the moderator to join the Executive Secretary, the Network's Coordinator, and Mr. Rupanigit in front of the rostrum for a photo. Please. Thank you, colleagues. May I ask you to please find your way back to your seats. Thank you so much. Thank you, colleagues. May I ask you to please find your seats? I would now like to introduce our panel discussion on the road to the second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Migration in Asia and the Pacific. Mr. Srinivas Tata, Director of the Social Development Division, UN ESCAP, will serve as our moderator for this discussion. Mr. Tata, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Alina. Friends, colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor of moderating a panel discussion, a very distinguished panel discussion to really set the stage for Migrants Day. And I'll be introducing our distinguished panelists before we start off with the panel discussion. On my right is His Excellency Mr. Fayaz Murshid Qazi, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, and the Permanent Representative to ESCAP from Bangladesh. Welcome, Your Excellency. As you know, Bangladesh is also one of the champion countries for the GCM from our region. We're joined online by Mr. Robert Ferrer Jr., Assistant Secretary for Migration Affairs, Department of Foreign Affairs of Philippines. Mr. Ferrer, welcome to you. I hope you can hear us.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Great to hear your voice, and we look forward to your contribution. We have Ms. Deepa Bharti, Chief Technical Advisor, International Labour Organization, Regional Office for Asia Pacific, to my left here. We're also joined by Ms. Pia Oberoi, who is the Senior Advisor on Migration and Human Rights of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in the Regional Office for Asia Pacific, who is also joining us online. Pia, I hope you can hear us and see us.
Hear you very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And of course, we have the two participants who are really the most important part of this panel in a way, who are from the stakeholders, Ms. Fish Pui Yuip, who's the Regional Coordinator for Asia, International Domestic Workers Federation, Hong Kong, China. Fish, welcome. And of course, my friend, Mr. Klostik Nielsen, Co-Secretary General, Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, Thailand. This panel discussion will be in two rounds. In the first round, we'll have an interactive discussion where I will pose a question to each one of our panelists, and I'll request them to deliver their response in about 4 minutes, which will be available. Of course, we'll give and take a few, half a minute here and there, I understand, because I think it's a very interesting topic and many have a lot to offer. And again, after the first round is covered, I'll come back to all of you with a single question for your final reflections. And then we'll open up for questions both online and from the floor. So without much ado, I'd like to pose my first question to His Excellency, the Ambassador of Bangladesh, to Thailand, as well as Permanent Representative to ESCAP. Your Excellency, Bangladesh is one of the champion countries of the Global Compact for Migration. And I know that you personally have been involved in this area for a long time, and we are very fortunate to have you on the panel. And we know that Bangladesh looks at migration as an integral component of its development aspirations. What do you see as major achievements in implementing the Global Compact since its adoption in 2018? What remains to be done? It would be great if you could focus your intervention on the experience not only of Bangladesh, but also for lessons for our region. Over to you, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tata. Thanks to ESCAP for having us as part of this panel. You are absolutely right. Bangladesh is pleased to be one of the champion countries for the Global Compact. But your records would probably reveal that Bangladesh was actually the first country to have officially mooted the idea of GCM with the UN Secretary General back in 2016, and that eventually took a life of its own. And later, Bangladesh co-facilitated the intergovernmental negotiations on the modalities for the International Migration Review Forum, IMRF, and also the progress declaration that emanated from the first IMRF in 2022. So there is a long-running attachment with GCM that Bangladesh actually feels a deep ownership about. In terms of most notable achievements, we would think that the whole idea of demystifying the GCM has been quite a remarkable progress. When GCM was first adopted in 2018, you would probably recall that a number of governments around the world actually got into serious internal political trouble and turmoils. But by the time of the first IMRF in 2022, we saw that the Progress Declaration was adopted without much hassles or hiccups. So that itself is quite a big achievement as far as GCM is concerned. And then, as other speakers have mentioned, in terms of its national implementation through a whole of government approach, in terms of improving migration governance overall, GCM has definitely been an important resource to that effect. There is no denying that migration still remains a politically fraught and divisive issue, even in a country such as ours, where migration has been mainstream into our national development strategies. And it is perhaps only justified that migration will be determined, migration policies will be determined by each country depending on its national interest and priorities. But that cannot and need not be an excuse for creating roadblocks on the way to legal pathways to migration. And that is the point that we would like to keep insisting upon as part of the upcoming review process. In fact, as we look at it, it does not serve anyone's interest to make regular migration channels complicated and convoluted under political pressure in the name of reversing irregular migration, only to be incentivizing the opposite. We would like to see GCM to be the lightning rod for promoting legal migration pathways, including ethical recruitment, drawing strength from its inbuilt 360-degree approach. And here, perhaps you wanted me to be a bit provocative. I would say that we tend to see a lopsided focus on only certain aspects of GCM, such as return and reintegration, often at the expense of issues that actually make a difference in the lives of actual or potential migrants. And I regret to say that we also see such tendencies among the concerned UN agencies, and if I may add, most likely due to donor prescriptions and compulsions. So in response to your specific question, what more needs to be done, please allow me to furnish a non-exhaustive list of 5 or 4 issues that we think still needs further attention. One, in view of aging societies in many destination countries, they need to seriously think about making investments in developing the right kind of skill sets that their employment markets would expect from would-be migrants from source countries, especially in digital or care economies. 2, there needs to be an environment of frank conversations among workers and employers groups in many destination countries about the situation of migrant workers in their own countries. Many of them tend to be more vocal about the situation of workers in other countries than they demonstrate to be concerning the rights of migrant workers in their midst. 3, the critical issue of reducing costs of remittance transfer by migrants through formal channels continues to be riddled with regulatory and procedural complications. A lot gets said about this, but the overall situation continues to remain in favor of the Hundi-dominated informal channels operating in this region. 4, we tend to lose enormous resources and potentials among migrants to meaningfully contribute to their host society due to the chronic lack of recognition and harmonization of certificates and skills. And I believe the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024 also had some points to make in this connection. And lastly, closer to home, The Rohingya humanitarian crisis continues to be a perennial source of irregular movements within our region, especially during the present dry seasons. Many of our development partners insist that as hosts, Bangladesh provide employment to the Rohingya, perhaps as an option or alternative to migration and repatriation. But any cursory trend analysis would reveal that most of these partners shy away from making investments in any labor-intensive manufacturing sectors that may generate employment for the refugees and their host communities. So to conclude, unless we actually address or give proper attention to some of these integral elements within GCM, there would continue to perhaps remain some glaring gaps in its implementation at both regional and international levels. Again, I tried to flag some of the outstanding points, but would highlight that this has not been an exhaustive list, but would definitely remain open to hearing from other esteemed panelists here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, for your succinct and very candid assessment. I think you focused on a few of the achievements, including the demystification of the GCM and the fact that maybe it's better understood, the need for a whole of government and a whole of society approach, and yet the overarching message to all to keep regular migration pathways accessible and simple. And of course, so we take that on board, and I'm sure other speakers will pick up on it. And you definitely did not disappoint. You were really, I think you highlighted some key issues for discussion for us. It is now my honor to move to Mr. Robert Ferrer Jr. Mr. Ferrer, Philippines is also one of the champion countries. At the 2018 conference on the adoption of the Global Compact in Marrakesh, your government had said that migration is a shared responsibility of sending, receiving, and transit states, and that no one state can address it alone. In view of the forthcoming second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of implementation of the Global Compact, what progress has been made in advancing regional cooperation on international migration? And of course, what more needs to be done? Over to you, Mr. Ferrer.
Thank you, Mr. Tata, our moderator, and it's my distinct honor and privilege to address the attendees as we commemorate International Migrants Day tomorrow. Speaking of the Philippines' own experience, the Philippines' stern advocacy and eventual adoption of the GCM in, as you mentioned, 2018. Since then, the Philippines has made significant strides in its implementation, of course, along with other countries. We codified Republic Act 11641, creating an entire ministry called Department of Migrant Workers to achieve a progressive realization of the 23 objectives of the GCM. So the country actively participated also in the International Migration Review Forum, or IMRF, in May 2022, as guided by our comprehensive voluntary national review to share progress in the GCM. As a GCM champion country, the Philippines continues to conduct various programs, initiatives, and engagements, noting the recommendations of the IMRF Progress Declaration to maintain and further accelerate its implementation of the GCM. The Philippines also submitted its inputs to the UN Secretary General's third biennial report on the implementation of the GCM. The report specifically recognizes the Philippines' establishment of a new department, the DMW, the introduction of electronic apostille in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and its partnership with the UN through the Joint Program on Bridging Recruitment to Reintegration and Migration Governance. Additionally, the Philippines was one of the pilot countries in standardization of data collection on disaster displacement to enhance evidence-based policy making, since the Philippines is one of the climate vulnerable countries in the world. In addition, the UN Network on Migration in the Philippines, in partnership with the DFA, my agency, invited the government actors, civil society, and private sector to the multi-stakeholder consultation for the second Asia-Pacific Regional Review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration implementation only last August 30 2024. The event served as a robust platform for engagement and peer learning among migration stakeholders. It also reinforced the importance, ladies and gentlemen, of multi-stakeholder engagement in migration governance, encouraging ongoing collaboration and dialogue among all stakeholders. The outputs of the consultation, of course, feeds into the preparation for the intergovernmental meeting in Bangkok in February 2025. Now, I'd like to also mention that the Philippines is very keen on this one particular global migration trend, is that many of the countries of the North, the West, basically, they are experiencing a birth gap wherein they are foreseeing a demographic crisis. Many of the countries in Asia are also facing the same. So countries with an aging population and declining birth rates tend to increase their demand for foreign labor to fill the workforce gap. Now, due to this demand, countries requiring more human resources tend to establish migration corridors that create gray areas for the migration governance of migrant sending countries, such as those visa programs that circumvent the usual labor migration policies of our country. So, in short, many of the countries that demand foreign workers, many of the actors, the non-state actors in these countries that demand foreign workers, resort to gray corridors, irregular corridors. In addition, the growing geopolitical crisis in numerous parts of the world increases the danger of nuclear exchanges between major world powers. This puts millions of migrants at an increased risk of annihilation or exposure to radiation fallout. Nonetheless, the Philippines commits to maintain its strong leadership in migration governance, particularly on ensuring the dignity, safety, and rights of migrants while contributing to global development objectives. So I will not mention here all the achievements of the Philippines domestically. We have, for example, we can only mention a few. The Philippines supported the joint program on bridging recruitment to reintegration in migration governance, or Philippine Bridge, convened in 2020 by the IOM, ILO, and UN Women, funded by the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund. The Commission on Filipinos Overseas likewise launched the full implementation of the CFO digital certificate, which can be accessed online by clients who completed the pre-departure orientation seminar of the Philippines. The CFO is the Philippine agency that handles marriage migrants, Filipinos who successfully integrate in host countries, and also those who are not covered by the migrant worker attaches of the Philippines, as well as by the Department of Foreign Affairs. We also have Protection and Border Enforcement Section, or IPROBes, which enhances strict enforcement of migration and departure formalities by bolstering efforts in the screening of arriving foreigners and detection of possible victims. Now, about the gaps, which our panelists and our first speaker mentioned also, at the national level, we recognize that there is a global demand for Filipino healthcare workers, especially in Western Eurasian countries, and therefore, also in Asian countries, I might add. Therefore, it has made bilateral labor agreements, or BLAs, a prominent feature in Philippine migration policy. So there is a growing need, growing recognition of the need to avoid disparities in the healthcare access of migrants as a means of protecting their health rights. This is very important for us, as the negative impact of the migration process has already left migrants in a very vulnerable state that contributes to excess mortality and morbidity among migrants. So we continue to recognize the important role of our diaspora in national development, and we will continue to do so under the presidency of Bongbong Marcos. And finally, at the international level, the Philippines has partnered with governments and international organizations in organizing forums and dialogues on timely and relevant issues on migration since the first IMRF in 2022. The Philippines continues to contribute, last 2 minutes, to the Migration Multi-Partner Trust Fund, whose first pilot projects included the submission of the Philippines UN country team to the Bridge program with an approved budget of $1,500,000. So the submission was reviewed by the Fund Management Unit as the most complete and ready for implementation, receiving high marks from the steering committee, which approved the project. pilot project by consensus. In July 2023, the Philippines made its payment for the 2022 Philippine voluntary contributions to the IOM Migration Emergency Funding Mechanism, or IOM MFE EFM, in the amount of $20,000, and the IOM Development Fund in the amount of $10,000. So advancing GECM implementation, we have been engaging with various regional blocs in ensuring that the Philippines continues its leadership role in promoting GCM, particularly the Philippines and Indonesia also co-led the crafting of the Migration and Health in ASEAN regional case studies and the ASEAN framework on health coverage for documented migrants, including migrant workers and special populations.
Thank you.
So
Mr. Ferrer, we'll
there are
come back
many
to you in the
others,
second
of
round.
course, but I would be very happy to continue discussion at the Q&A and open forum. Thank you so
very
much for your indulgence.
Not at all, sir. Your inputs are very important. As one of the champion countries, I think there's a lot to be learned from the various examples that you provided, and provides a good base for when I come back to you for the second round. I have now the privilege of turning to Ms. Deepa Bharti from the ILO and request her to provide an assessment of the achievements and the remaining challenges in labor migration. Since migration for work remains the dominant form in our region, what progress has been made and what remains to be done in labor migration?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tata. Excellencies, esteemed colleagues, very good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to ESCAP and all involved in the APMR on its launch today. As you rightly said, labor, whether an explicit driver of migration or a means by which migration is financed, remains a dominant feature in our region. I won't be able to do justice in the 4 minutes to all the progress and the richness of the APMR, but I will try to highlight 4 key points in terms of progress where our region has shown developments, progress, and results. First, legal pathways, including legislative advancements, ratification of ILO's conventions, progress on the fair recruitment initiatives, remedial measures, complaint mechanisms, skills pathways recognition, and nexus of climate change and migration. And as we see, these contribute to different objectives of the GCM. First, in terms of regular pathways for temporary labor migration, we know in our region, these are most often regulated by MOUs, memorandums of understanding, bilateral agreements, country-specific policies. And we have seen at least 26 new MOUs and bilateral agreements which have been signed since 2020, which are increasingly, many of them are incorporating fair and ethical recruitment provisions. Now, coming to fair and ethical recruitment, because I'll be also connecting this to challenges and building on what was mentioned by the previous distinguished speakers. We have seen at national level revision in laws, countries such as Thailand, which have lowered visa fees, or countries like Indonesia, Mongolia, which have eliminated worker paid fees. We see systematic collection of data through national surveys as part of the labor force survey on SDG indicator 10.7.1 by Bangladesh, Cambodia, Philippines, Vietnam. We have seen increased ratification of ILO core conventions, including, as many of you may be aware, occupational safety and health being new, a fundamental principle and right at work, and increasing ratification of ILO Convention 155, most recently by Malaysia, Brunei Darussalam. The issue of social protection as part of legal coverage has been mentioned in ASEAN through the Declaration on Portability of Social Security Benefits. At national level, extension of social protection to migrant workers, for example, in Malaysia, and ASEAN Declaration on Care Economy, which is important in the context of the aging population. I would also like to mention which was mentioned by Sabine at global level, the ILO resolution, the International Labour Conference resolution on decent work and the care economy, which highlights just that labor is not a commodity, work in the care economy is not a commodity. Now, digitalization of recruitment processes, there have been several important initiatives, and digitalization can be a very concrete measure to manage migration, also to enhance transparency and accountability. We have seen remedial measures through increased complaint mechanisms, which have been established and managed by civil society organizations, trade unions. Businesses have established codes of conduct, and some of the private sector examples of recruitment fees being charged for this being reimbursed. So fees being to the tune of more than $1 million being paid to migrant workers by companies for labor rights abuses. Just moving on to skills, I think this was mentioned in the context of ASEAN. There have been increased bilateral and sub-regional cooperation, frameworks on recognition of skills. Notably, one example to mention is Thailand with Cambodia, Laos, PDR, Myanmar. And while a lot of this has been in the ASEAN in the skilled occupations, we have been promoting as ILO on recognition of medium skill categories as well. Now, the Global Skills Partnership in the Pacific and the South Asian Qualification Framework developed in South Asia by SAARC are other notable examples. Last but not least, progress in terms of climate change and migration. There's increasing attention to the connection being made between climate change and the migration nexus, and in the Pacific, the milestone which was achieved by the adoption of the regional framework on climate mobility by Pacific Island countries last year. Now, linked to some of this progress, unfortunately, gaps remain, and I think our previous two speakers have already mentioned this, but I would like to highlight that while there's been progress, challenges in regular pathways remain, and these are related to difficulty for migrant workers to access information and services, difficulties in practice, expenses, and very often, many of these not being gender responsive. Not only in terms of regular pathways, but also laws and policies. And I know Fish will be speaking further in the context of domestic care workers. Unfortunately, despite the progress, many migrant workers lack access to fundamental principles and rights at work, notably the right to freedom of association and collective bargaining, effective remedial measures, there's still discrimination, lack of access to effective social protection, and we can build on some of this. Where there are progress in legislations, there is still gap between legislation and enforcement. Recruitment malpractices, and I do want to speak about this because we are increasingly seeing, it was mentioned also it's mentioned in the report, and Sabine mentioned the links with online scams, the flip side of recruitment malpractices leading to online scams, trafficking. Research shows that workers very often end up paying as high as 7 to 18 months of their wages in some Asia-Pacific corridors as cost of recruitment. Finally, a couple of challenges. Skills recognition, particularly in women-dominated sectors, domestic and care work still needs a lot of progress. Admission policies for medium-skilled workers. Now, last couple of points which I have to mention are in relation to return and reintegration. Migration pathways should comprehensively include information, trainings, and programs for return reintegration. These need to be planned before, during, and after migration, and a shared responsibility by countries of origin and destination. And finally, something which was already mentioned, but it's important, is the cost of remittances. It's still very high, and a lot of it is still done through informal channels. There is need to address this, perhaps by using digitalization process to increase access to banking services, which are also gender responsive, with particular attention to women migrant workers, building trust, and other challenges which exist. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepa. Thank you for highlighting the progress made before highlighting the challenges. A lot has been done, a lot needs to be done, but it's important to acknowledge what's being done. And some of your concrete examples show that the role of sub-regional organizations, especially becoming also very important, ASEAN, SAARC, the Pacific Forum. So that was very important. Thank you very much, Deepa. Let me now turn to Ms. Pia Oberoi, who's joining us online. As Senior Advisor on Migration, Pia, on Migration and Human Rights with CHR, you have been involved in international migration discussions representing the voice of the United Nations at the global and regional levels for some time now. How is the United Nations system supporting member states and non-government stakeholders in implementing the Global Compact? Where do you see the gaps and what needs to be done to address them? Over to you, Pia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And indeed, it's an honor to be with you today, even though not in person. And it has been an honor to provide support to the negotiations of the Global Compact for Migration, and more broadly, to be part of the interagency efforts within the United Nations migration coordination platforms over several years, and to see them progress and blossom in many ways. But in many ways, the support that the UN system has provided to member states and stakeholders, it stems at a very fundamental level from the normative framework, which is the foundation, indeed, of the United Nations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, as we know, turned 75 last year, was the first legal document to set out a vision for what binds us together as a human family. It allows us to articulate the nature of the communities in which we want to live and those that we wish to leave for our children. The GCM is rooted in these principles and norms. It rests, as we know, from its opening words, on the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. And we know also that societies that are grounded in human rights are better equipped to withstand shocks and to resist fragmentations. And these are particularly important principles at this time of conflict, crises, and polarization. As the GCM guides, a comprehensive approach to migration governance must be premised on an overarching obligation to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of all migrants, regardless of their migration status. And here it's important to remember that the universal promise of human rights extends equally to non-citizens as well as to citizens. Many years ago, the Swiss philosopher Max Frisch noted of the so-called European guest worker program, we wanted workers, but human beings came. And in fact, in our research in the region, OHCHR, the UN Human Rights Office, has found that many temporary labor migration programs in and from Asia and the Pacific impose a series of restrictions on the human rights of migrants and their families, such as the denial of civil and political rights, like the right to free expression and association, as well as limits on their economic and social rights, like poor healthcare, inadequate food, substandard housing. But through the lens of the Global Compact for Migration, we should seek instead to recenter the human person within all migration pathways, particularly within these low-wage temporary migration programs, where the experience of many involved is of precarity and vulnerability. Migrant workers are not only people who work, of course. They exist within, but also outside of and beyond the workplace. They are parents, they are spouses, they are children themselves to elderly parents. They are people who exist within racialized minorities, within gender discourses and hierarchies, and within intersectional spaces. Migrants are human rights holders in all their diversity. But across our region, many migration pathways do not, for instance, pay attention to the family as the natural and fundamental unit of society. This represents an interruption of human rights as well as a sociocultural cost. There is a personal and societal cost to women and men who are prohibited from marrying or establishing families. There is a cost to children who are deprived of one or both of their parents for much of their childhood, in terms of school dropout, for instance, and early marriage. Migrants in irregular or undocumented situations are often compelled to move and stay through precarious and dangerous pathways, suffering violence and abuse, even as they seek to reunite with their family. These are critical human rights issues and are as essential to the experience of migrants and their families, as are the very important decent work deficits we've also talked about. At its heart, migration is a deeply human phenomenon, affecting not just those people who move in search of dignity and safety, but also reaching into the lives of those they leave behind and those who welcome them into their communities. Yet migrants and migration have long been held up as scapegoats in times of uncertainty and societal stress. And as we have seen this year during this global year of elections, this is a trend that is likely to continue as long as it translates into a winning electoral strategy. Misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech against migrants not only whips up hatred, it is also used as a monetization and profit-making strategy by actors operating online. But I'll finish here. A human rights lens enables us to see the human being behind the migration megatrend. Such a lens individualizes and restores dignity to migrants and their families. It demands that we understand the different layers of discrimination faced by migrants, based, for instance, on class, on socioeconomic status, on race, gender, or age. It calls us to enable migrants to be part of society in meaningful ways, to create a more resilient social fabric, to build a big tent of solidarity, and to change public narratives of migration towards empathy and the universality of the human experience, to realize that we have more in common than what divides us. And we hope that above all, it is these principles of universality, of human rights fulfillment, on which we can premise the second regional review in February. I'll hand back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pia, for this passionate espousal of the rights-based approach and for putting the human element, never forgetting that migrants are human beings fully and holders of rights. So I'd like to turn now to Ms. Fish Ip, who's a representative of domestic workers active at the Asia-Pacific level. So Ms. Ip, how far have you come in facilitating fair and ethical recruitment and decent work of migrant workers? While you can highlighting some achievements, please also let us know what needs to be done better.
For achievement, I will try my best. Yeah, you know all what I'm talking about, especially in the post-COVID period and also in the period of war and conflicts. We do see there has been an increase of unscrupulous brokers and employment agencies and many more human trafficking. And this issue about fair and ethical recruitment, decent work is really more urgent than ever before because of this situation, and many of you have mentioned about the digital scams as well. And if you know well, after the COVID period, we have also some Asian countries who have been in economic crisis that migrant workers do take more risks to escape from the country to look for income. And we, as the IWF organizing the domestic workers, we have observed more people, more workers going through the irregular pathway, ending up in very unusual destinations. And how they went there, it still remain largely unknown and why we don't know still. And it has been especially highlighted by the UN Network on Migration that much more work has to be done in the continuing recruitment malpractices, especially in excessive worker paid recruitment fees and related costs. And even the workers have to pay like half year to 1.5 years of wages, resulting workers in debt bondage, not only to the workers, but also to their families. And the recruitment agencies often intimidate the workers that you cannot terminate the contract, you cannot run away from the abuses and exploitation because I will charge you, I will need you from your family for more money. And the families of the migrants already pay for the agencies their own houses, even their living means like fishing boats to all these unscrupulous brokers and agencies. So the situation is really, really urgent for all of us to call into attention. And still, until now, the confiscation of identity documents contract remain a common malpractices. Despite that, we do see an increased intention to reduce costs of migration, especially in recruitment fees by the states to better monitor the recruitment processes. Indonesia, Laos, etc., has some intention to have zero placement fee. But of course, the move is yet to be fastened up with implementation mechanism and policies to be in place. And also because the information and access to information is still largely not around, so the papers, documents, information are still largely stay in the hands of the employment agencies that ends up that migrant workers are under the control of all these agencies. And although we have a little bit more intention by the governments, but the implementation is really something that we have to work on together. We have also seen there has been an increased business sector to open and start some ethical recruitment agencies. The initiative and intention are there, but it's left to the government what kind of policies and laws to encourage and support all these recruitment, ethical recruitment practices is yet to be seen. Despite that, we have seen self-organized migrant workers, unions and organizations who keep on organizing and advocate for their rights because they are the people who knows the best from the ground. And on the decent work, migrant workers still suffer major abuses and exploitation, unpaid and underpayment of wages, no rest days and holidays until now, restriction of freedom. The sponsorship-tied system is still largely in place in Asia. And all these has been silencing migrant workers to escape from abuses and exploitation, and the lack of labor inspection, especially for migrant domestic workers in the private households. And there has been still lack of access to justices for the migrant workers, because once they want to escape from the abuses and exploitation, it means that they can no longer to stay to pursue their cases. And lack of information, the lack of information and the channel to access their justice. So it's still yet for us to have more, to provide freedom of association for migrant workers, because they are the ones who can monitor how the system can be better. They are the unions and organizations by the migrant workers are the ones that allow the migrant workers to then stand up and voice out their issues. We have seen good practices already, more achievement by the migrant workers to be organized. We have seen Perdimek and AMPO in Malaysia. We have seen some individual migrant workers who stand up. For example, Sabri bin Umar in Malaysia, who stand up and successfully fought for the unpaid wages, although he faced abuses. And with support of the unions, NGOs, and human rights lawyers, he is able to get released. And recently, we have seen the Kawaguchi workers in Malaysia to fight for the unpaid salary. And we've seen more ASEAN declarations. We hope the declarations will not result only in paper. So the assistance and support for organizing migrant workers is still key for seeking for justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that real grassroots level view from the level from an organization that is actively engaged in helping migrants at the ground level. Your experience was really vital. Last but not least, I turn to Klaus Dick Nielsen, who represents the Asia Pacific Refugee Rights Network, with much migration and experience in civil society engagement on migration. Klaus, how do we reduce the vulnerabilities and eliminate discrimination of migrants? It's a very broad question, but to be answered in 4 minutes. And what role can civil society play in working with governments? I mean, just to ensure that migration is safe, orderly, and regular.
Thank you very much, Srinivas. I was actually told I have 5 minutes, but I'll try to be as quick as I can. Thank you. And thanks to ESCAP and the regional UN network on migration for giving us space at this important event. I would like to start with that. So in terms of vulnerabilities, we have listed a few highlights, and this is a non-exhaustive list, but I would say that one of the most important things is to make people on the move aware of their rights, irrespective of their immigration status. Second, all actors, including states, must continue and must have a consistent human rights-based approach to migration governance. The focus from burden to agency of migrants and other people on the move must be shifted, including to refugees and stateless persons, and it must be recognized formally that these people are active contributors to the economies and societies in which they live. While laws, policies, and practices are important, we also need to think of how we can change the behaviors and practices concretely. Fish was talking about that, for example, of employers through community approaches, and also to improve understanding of migration perspectives among business owners through industry and civil society-led training, for example. Civil society actors must be supported politically and financially, I would like to add, to ensure that we can continue to work towards ensuring that people on the move do not have their rights, human rights violated, but have adequate access to services, including education and health, and can pursue livelihoods. Lastly, on this point, I think what has also been alluded to in Sabine's presentation, promoting good and emerging practices is something we need to be better at in civil society, as well. We complain a lot, and there is indeed, dare I say, a lot to complain about, but there are also some good practices that we have heard, including from the interim government of Bangladesh, which I understand has already started a Labour Commission and Women Rights Commission. To your question about eliminating discrimination, while so I'll just focus on two things here: laws, policies, and practices. There is a need to look at discrimination in those areas, and first and foremost, we need states needs to see migration beyond the nation-state lens, which leads to a focus on national security and border control. We should move towards desecuritizing and decriminalizing migration, because the solution to eliminate irregular migration is by expanding regular migration, not by penalizing, securitizing, and demonizing irregular migration. Just a word on public discourse. My colleague Pia was talking about that before, what OHCSR has done, because globally nationalism is driving xenophobia and discrimination. And we need to be better with media practitioners to ask the right questions to the public and to spark reflection. A couple of words on what civil society, which role civil society can play. I would actually like to change that to your question to which role must civil society play? Yeah. Because we must be treated as equal partners and not in an ad hoc and tokenistic manner. And actually, this very meeting and the process of the stakeholder consultations, which are being led by us, is a very good example of how we can come to the negotiation tables as equal partners. But this may be an exception, and we must ensure that this continues also at national level on discussions on the GCM, for example. It's about understanding and recognizing our strengths as civil society and limitations when we work with states and UN agencies indeed, and have an open, transparent and honest dialogue on addressing gaps and solutions on migration governance. Two more points. Civil society brings concrete experiences to negotiation tables in real time, from local to national to regional and global. And this is not only right, but immensely effective, I would say, as situations and conditions are changing rapidly in the very diverse region that Asia is. We must ensure, however, that those voices are diverse, both in terms of sectorial representation, so that the 12 stakeholder categories as named in the GCM are present, but also in terms of gender and age, and importantly, also geographical representation. And here I'm thinking in particular about two regions whose representatives must also be present at the negotiation tables, namely the Pacific and Central Asia. Lastly, people with lived experience, so migrants, refugees, other people on the move must be present at the negotiation tables. Again, meaningful participation must be diverse, but also intentional. So for example, when there are state-led and UN-led consultations and so forth, so issues like visa restrictions, funding, and allowance to allow online participations are issues that can be addressed there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Klaus. You really highlighted several points, spoke from the heart about meaningful engagement, about being given an equal seat at the table, and really exploiting all the knowledge and experience that you bring to the table. I actually would like, with the agreement of our panelists, perhaps to, for the second round, to come back to them after we hear. Maybe there'll be a few questions, and then we'll come back to you for a more comprehensive wrap-up, and maybe there'll be questions asked. So I'd like to open up the floor for any questions at this point, based on the first round of interventions from first people present here in person. Otherwise, I know that there are quite a large number of participants online, especially the participants from the Pacific too, who have stayed on. It's pretty late for them. Would any one of them like to raise a question or a concern, please? While they are thinking, can I come to my my UN network colleagues here if there are any issues that they think need to be highlighted more. I know that people take a little time to crystallize their thoughts, so I'm coming to you. I'd like to go first to my friend Christine here, who's the regional director of UN Women. Please share your thoughts, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fascinating, and also on Sabine's presentation on the report. I hear a lot of references to gender. I wanted to hear your reflections on what has changed, for better or for worse, for women migrants specifically. And if at a sub-regional level, you can see a distinction in that maybe some sub-regions are doing better than others. That's my first reflection.
You really set the platform, at least for the first set of responses from our panelists, but does anyone else who would like to intervene? If not, let us come back. I'd like to start with His Excellency the Ambassador. Apart from, while you're answering that question, maybe I would also like to ask you, also apart from answering the question that Christine has raised, it's about if you had to think of one regional priority that, of all the various issues that deserve attention, if you had to pick one as the most important, which would it be?
Thank you very much. It was a fascinating conversation as expected. So thanks to all the panelists. I mean, couldn't agree more with actually all my fellow participants here. Regarding gender, I think the biggest achievement is gender has been mainstreamed into the migration discourse. I mean, this is probably the starting point. And then our colleagues have highlighted some of the notable achievements that have been made in that sector. As far as we are concerned, since we were hearing about the particular vulnerability of domestic workers, the ILO Convention 189 is definitely worth mentioning. That should kind of be always pushed for in all our conversations, especially when we are looking at addressing the inherent challenges within domestic and care economies. And then that has been complemented by ILO Convention 190, which is also particularly focused on women's situation in the employment sector. In terms of gender-specific challenges, again, I think Madam Eep has been very eloquent, and the issue of debt bondage, wage theft, identity document seizure, I mean, these are common challenges that we keep hearing about. One thing that I would add is often the kind of social ostracization that many of these returnee female migrants face in their, within their families, in their host societies. We often perhaps tend to overlook that dynamics or aspect, but that needs to be brought into the conversation as well. Sorry, to your specific question, sir. I didn't address the issue of climate mobility in my last intervention, but as far as our sub-regional context is concerned, I think that is kind of emerging as the overriding concern and priority. There is a lot of discussion on climate mobility, climate-induced displacement, which is very much welcome. I mean, this year we saw this high-level dialogue on even sea level rise in the UN General Assembly. So there is a focus on that. But what is perhaps we missing is something that Ms. Bharti was referring to, the nexus between climate change and migration. I mean, we are talking about climate mobility, but are we connecting the GCM conversation with what's happening under the framework of UNFCCC? If you look at the UNFCCC negotiations, you would see that delegations are still actually struggling to even bring in a reference to migration as a possible adaptive mechanism within the context of UNFCCC discussions. So these silos needed to be bridged, and these gaps need to be kind of addressed. Otherwise, we will keep talking about it, but starting with the normative exercise that we would like to see, we would not really achieve much. So this is probably where we would suggest that let us try to mobilize our collective strength and resources. Thank you very much.
Excellency, thank you so much for highlighting both the gender aspects as well as, again, emphasizing your priority as something that was very important And I'm sure a lot of our delegations in the Pacific would also kind of identify with this, apart from a large number in Asia Pacific. I thought Mr. Ferrer actually brought this up in his intervention too. Can I come to you, Mr. Ferrer, in terms of, do you have a response to Ms. Christine Arab's comment on integrate, to the extent to which gender is being integrated or being addressed within our migration-related responses, and also your thought about the single priority that you would think of all the issues that you mentioned, perhaps one issue that you think would deserve attention. Mr. Ferrer? Yeah, come to you, Devin. Are you online? We'll come back. There seems to be a technical issue, but we'll come back. Maybe maybe Fish wants to answer that before I come back to Deepa and Pia and others.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Certainly, this is so much important if we talk about the gender dimension of migration. Indeed, many of the previous distinguished speakers has mentioned about the aging population that has put an increased demand on the care workforce and also domestic workers, while care work and domestic workers are largely not recognized and largely excluded from the labor laws and protection. So there has been a big pressure in the countries of destination that they suppress the wages of the care workers and domestic workers because they feel like the general population, the general public who has a high demand to have a domestic worker, care worker, but at the same time, they don't feel they are able to pay. But actually, that is due to the lack of policy support and care support in the country. So we have seen first initiative by the countries of destination to specifically exclude one sector from the labor law, which is domestic workers. So for example, in Hong Kong in 2000, the Mandatory Pension Fund policy law and also 2010 minimum wage protection law they single out domestic workers to be excluded. And the South Korea, now the public debate is about the wages of the migrant domestic workers have to be suppressed. So this is very urgent to look into why domestic workers so much into high demand, but at the same time not recognized. So the urgency to have domestic workers law inclusion in the labor law is very important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was important for you to make that detailed clarification. Do we have a couple of questions still coming up online and otherwise? So can we take them before we come back to you, or did you have? Okay. I know Ms. Emma Wheaty has raised her hand and wishes to ask a question before we go on. Emma, are you online?
Yes, thank you. And firstly, thank you to all our esteemed panelists for sharing candidly. The issues that has been raised is issues that similar to the Pacific, and we thank the panelists for raising those issues. I think, like some of the panelists highlighting our concerns around the climate migration. In relation to the legal aspects and legislation around what happens to people who will be relocating to other countries. In some respects, it is already taking place in certain migration policy in place. So my question, and it's also a reiteration of what has been mentioned around human rights. how can we look at the legalization and we talk about human rights over and over again. We talk about discrimination over and over again, and it is one of the hardest areas that we are finding in terms of trying to advocate for our vulnerable migrants who are needing some legal support in that respect. So there is a need to strengthen, and I will use the term that my sister Fish has said. There is an urgency to look at how can we strengthen those human rights legislative processes in countries to help the migrant workers. In addition to that, for the Pacific, we're really looking at how can the UN and other agencies help our people who are needing to relocate. And it is going to be happening very shortly in some of the countries. How can we provide the support in terms of them needing to understand their rights and their obligations under the migration? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I think it was very important to have the perspective from the Pacific, and thank you for really coming in with those remarks, which are very, very important. Thank you so much. We'll reach out to, I think you've kind of provided support to some of the statements made by panelists. We'll come back to them if they have further clarifications and extend questions. Can I move to you, Deepa, if you would like to expand on any of the issues raised now or before?
Thank you very much. I just have a couple of points in response to what Christine said, is what has changed better for women migrants. Of course, there are still a lot of challenges, which Fish has mentioned, but we see a lot of discourse on care economy domestic workers, as we've seen this year, given both on unpaid and paid care work. And with the ILO's 5-hour framework, this has been quite critical. We have seen the ASEAN declaration on the issue, as well as going forward, the action plan. I've mentioned already the legislative frameworks. Of course, there's still gaps, big gaps, unfortunately, but just to answer that there has been progress. Likewise with skill certification. The one topic we have mentioned a little bit, and I want to talk about, is violence and harassment. This being one of a very specific, gender-specific issue, not just for women migrant workers, but even migrant workers with diverse sexual orientation, gender identity. We have seen 5 ratifications so far of ILO Convention 190, which His Excellency the Ambassador mentioned, but also a range of activities and initiatives by employees organizations, workers organizations, and member states. And I make that, I highlight that because social dialogue and a whole of society approach, working whole of government approach is underlined in GCM. It's fundamental. And we see that these changes happening, progress happening, because there are women's movements, stakeholders, workers, movements, workers themselves who are part of these processes, because migration policies and their effective implementation needs to be people-centered, and that's the kind of progress we need women to be there. One other progress we have seen in the last 4 or 5 years is increase in sex disaggregated data in the international labor migration statistics, particularly for ASEAN region, and I have colleagues who can speak more to that. So with all of the challenges we talk about, there has been this progress. I do want to pick up one issue, if I may, please. I had 5 regional priorities given our range of the region. But again, to say effective legal social protection and change in attitudes. This I didn't speak much about in terms of challenges, but that's fundamental. Our research shows that where there's interaction with migrant workers and migrants, policymakers, public have positive attitudes. There has been increased support to enhance services for women survivors of violence, migrants. But when that does not exist, we have seen, and COVID was key in exposing the xenophobia, intolerance, racism, and discrimination. So changing those mindsets are important. Collection of data is important. And I think our colleague from Pacific spoke about climate change, so I won't speak more on that. Thank you.
Can I, Pia, can I move to you to tell me your one regional priority, one issue that you would like us to highlight when, I know there are a number of issues which are important, but taking into account what others have mentioned, is there something that you think is very important that we need to focus on?
Thank you very much, Srinivas. And what the thing that I would highlight is actually was raised by His Excellency the Ambassador, which is to look into the ways in which pathways can be created to protect rights, to reduce inequalities in line with the SDG agenda, but also to address and reduce vulnerabilities in line with Objective 7 of the GCM. Because really we cannot progress towards these global goals when we see migrants that are being left behind. We can't remove the silos and meaningfully address inequalities without putting in place some of these pathways. And just to take on the point that was made by the speaker from the Pacific around climate mobility, pathways indeed are essential to be able to secure legal status, for instance, to ensure access to justice, to ensure that whatever is being created through the examining climate relocation, for instance, whether that's internal or external, that you're having pathways that are secure, that you're not creating more precarity by putting people into situations where they face further inequalities. And just a couple of points, because I did want to address the issue of migrant women. And to really to highlight that, and fully agree that there have been both challenges and gaps, but understanding migrant women as rights holders in all their diversity, coming at it through the care and support agenda, which is also a growing issue within the Human Rights Council context, that migrant women are holders of care responsibilities themselves, as well as providing care through the work that they produce. And so again, pathways are very important to ensuring that when women migrate, that they are able to fulfill their own care responsibilities, not only through the remitting of money, but also through, for instance, family unity. And it's important from a gender perspective to also understand where men and boys might particularly be vulnerable to risk. For instance, we've heard about the kind of the scam trafficking issue that we see. So I think again, pathways to me kind of, end to really understanding the migration governance perspective in a holistic way. To highlight the importance of empowering migrants to become full members of our societies. And finally, really important in terms of an access to justice, the colleague spoke about protecting migrant human rights defenders. And we too have been speaking with defenders who have faced reprisals, with deportations, for speaking out against injustice and inequality. And it would be very, very important that the regional review addresses security and protection for migrant human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pia. Thank you very much. Is Mr. Ferrer back online, please?
Yes, I have some difficulty in connection.
Yes.
Sorry.
I just wanted, no problem. Mr. Ferrer, you wanted to come back to you for you heard the rest of the panelists, I think. Any short reflections and for highlighting one priority that you would like to highlight? The one, I mean, you listed a number of achievements and areas of concern, but apart from reacting to what some of the other panelists have said very briefly, it would be great if you could highlight the one regional priority that you think is important.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to continue. Well, we are now engaging in what we call migration dialogues. So because of the many of our colleagues have seen the Philippines as giving a gold standard for assistance to its nationals. And therefore, we are doing a series of collaborative efforts, not just with IOM, but with the countries of Central Asia, with India, with Indonesia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. So, for example, we hosted their delegations in 2024 so that we could exchange best practices. So I think these kinds of interactions should continue on a bilateral level, especially within regions and among regions. For example, we hosted a consultation on diaspora engagement and management with the Indian government, on the occasion of the 4th Philippines-India Joint Consular Consultation Meeting last April 2024. We also have joined analysis of best practices in migration governance, such as Prosper with Bangladesh and Nepal. So, and I'd like to go back to what we mentioned a while ago, that there is a serious need to for the global south, basically, to coordinate mechanisms wherein they would allow their nationals to be deployed to needy, human resources needy global north countries, so that they don't have to resort to irregular migration scenarios that would leave them vulnerable. Now, I have been consul general in Turkey, in India, in Moscow, and I have seen how the casualties have come, you know, in terms of being jailed in these migrant worker accepting countries. Also, the difficulties in tracking them down, difficulties in providing them assistance where they are. My office is also involved in repatriating our foreign workers, our Filipino workers in Gaza, in Sudan, in Lebanon. So more coordination, basically, and we need to be ahead of the curve when it comes to the next crises that are on the horizon, because according to scientific data, there is a correlation between areas of the world where there is a high projected population growth, and they will also experience massive climate change scenarios, negative climate change scenarios, and at the same time there would be challenges in food security. So there's going to be a trifecta in certain parts of the world where these three factors converge.
Yes.
And you know what we know, those who are familiar with history, we already know what has happened when these factors combine. And my last point, Mr. Chair, colleagues, I'm sorry, the Philippines, together with UN Office of Disaster Risk Reduction, UNDRR, hosted a side event during the Asia Pacific Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2024 on reducing disaster risk and building resilience, tools to address displacement and human mobility in the era of climate change. And we would like to submit the recommendations of this meeting to move this call for coordination and pre-sensing forward, because we need it more than ever, because there's so many crises in the world right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you brought in the interrelations, the important issue of South-South cooperation, and continuing the multi-sectoral dialogue and multi-stakeholder dialogue. Klaus, I'm giving you the last word, literally, so please give us your priority and react to anything else.
No pressure. Thank you. Yes, I actually wanted to add on what my previous colleagues said about coordination and the need to work on these very complex issues together. So I would actually say that what I would like is more in terms of a process. So it's objective 23 of the GCM to strengthen international cooperation and global partnership for safe, orderly and regular migration. I think the whole of government and whole of society approach is paramount. It is a regional matter. No individual country can address these highly complex issues alone. And I would also like to add that the region and country should include their non-citizens, including migrants, refugees, and stateless persons, which the GCM also covers, when formulating development strategies, and above all, ensure that non-citizens, irrespective of their legal status, can enjoy their human rights to which they're entitled and deserved. Two more points. Monitoring and implementation is also, we have sort of fragments of that, or there are some, in the report that has been launched. But again, perhaps a more continuous monitoring of what is actually happening, including the champion countries in this region, of which there are many, and also how to make the GCM more relevant for civil society. Actually, my distinguished colleague from Bangladesh, I think, used the term demystifying the GCM. I think also, for many of our partners in civil society, the whole process can seem quite abstract. What is it? Why should we engage with this sort of convoluted process if you sit and are very busy with with your work. So I think we in civil society, we must ensure that this space is diversified and intentional, but also states and UN agencies has a key role to play here on how to make the G7 more relevant. And then lastly, I would say, I would also like to stress that the conversation must continue beyond the 6th of February next year. That is very important too, because we are, many of us will go back to our work and are busy and so forth, but I think there needs to be a mechanism to ensure that we can continue to have this conversation before the IMRF in 2026 and before the next regional review, if that would happen in 2029. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Klaus. And I can clearly see the last request that you made. I mean, we have members of the regional network here. We have the coordinator right here who's definitely taken note. And I think we intend to take this momentum forward. And I think it's important not to just end it with the regional review, but keep it going to the next review and further. So thank you very much. I will not attempt, I apologize that I've slightly failed in my duties as moderator, but when the discussion is that rich, we've gone overshot our time by about 10 minutes. Can I ask for a big hand of applause for all our participants for their contribution? And I'd like to hand the floor back to our MC.
Thank you, Mr. Tata. Dear participants, colleagues, thank you very much for your attention and meaningful participation this afternoon. Panelists, please find your way to your seats. And meanwhile, could the speakers for our closing remarks please take their seats on the rostrum? I would first like to invite Ms. June Kunugi, Regional Director of UNICEF for East Asia and the Pacific, to deliver her closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Your Excellencies, distinguished representatives of member states, the United Nations, including UN ESCAP, civil society organizations, distinguished partners and colleagues. International Migrants Day is a moment for us to reflect, not just on the challenges faced by migrant populations, especially children and adolescents, but also on their incredible contributions to our societies and economies. Most importantly, it's a moment to recognize their rights, which are universal and non-negotiable. 2 out of every 5 international child migrants are born in Asia. That's more than any other region in the world. And globally, 1 in 66 children live outside their country of birth. These are not just numbers. They represent millions of individual stories of courage and resilience. Families on the move are searching for what all of us want, a safer, better life. Many are fleeing poverty, natural disasters, fueled by climate change, or the horrors of conflict. As 15-year-old Gabriel from the Philippines once said, "It is very difficult. There is a war going on, and then livelihoods are affected because of the flood. All Gabriel wants is what every child deserves: safety, the chance to go to school, and a shot at a brighter future." But the reality is, migration is not always a journey to opportunity. Millions of children across Asia and the Pacific face enormous barriers: restricted access to basic services, statelessness, protection risks, and xenophobia. Many are separated from their parents, left behind, lost along the way, or traveling alone. Their journeys are often long and dangerous, filled with uncertainty and unimaginable risks, such as trafficking and exploitation. The Asia-Pacific Migration Report, which we launched today, sheds light on these harsh realities. UNICEF is very proud to have contributed to this important work, ensuring that the voices of children and young people were also included throughout its pages. This report is a testament to what we can achieve when we come together as one UN. Beyond the report, UNICEF, ILO, UN Women, and UNODC, is part of an EU-supported program aimed at reducing vulnerabilities among migrants, especially women and children. Through this partnership, we're helping to develop national policies that make life safer and better for families on the move. We're working to break down the barriers so children can access the services and opportunities they need to thrive. And many of the speakers referred to the importance of that today. And we're also putting children and young people at the center, not just as beneficiaries, but also as powerful agents of change. This program also aligns with the ASEAN Declaration and Regional Plan of Action on the Rights of Children in the context of migration, a critical framework we help to develop. We also look forward to working to translating the global MOU signed between IOM and UNICEF at COP29 into action in the region, especially on climate mobility. As we launch the Asia-Pacific Migration Report, UNICEF reaffirms its commitment to protecting and empowering migrant children and their families. We will continue working closely with our UN colleagues, with governments, NGOs, and youth networks to tackle the challenges these children face. A route-based approach addressing risks along their journeys offers us a significant opportunity to make a real difference. The stakes are incredibly high, ladies and gentlemen, for tens of millions of children, for their futures and for ours. International Migrants' Day must be more than speeches and good intentions. It must be a rallying cry, a day when the passion and commitment in this room spark real action, because these children are not just migrants. They are dreamers, change makers, and the leaders of tomorrow. Let's honor their courage by matching it with our own and with impactful actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kunugi, for your reflections and especially for this powerful call to action. I would now like to invite Mr. Gert Trogman, Manager of the Global Policy Network and Regional Program of UNDP, Asia and the Pacific, to speak. Mr. Trogman, please share with us your closing remarks.
Thank you, MC, distinguished delegates, representatives, colleagues from the previous panel, with a special thanks to you. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues from all the different partner agencies and my fellow speakers here, it's a pleasure for me to say a few words on behalf of UNDP on this occasion of commemorating the International Migrants' Day and also the launch of the Asia-Pacific Migration Report, to which also UNDP's regional team was able to contribute. Sustainable development requires close attention to human mobility. When migration is safe, orderly, and effectively managed, it becomes a powerful driver for development, fostering economic growth, enhancing human capital, and channeling the contributions of migrant diasporas to promote equitable and inclusive progress. When migrants aren't supported and protected, or migration is mismanaged, contributions to development are limited at best, and it's often migrants themselves who are the ones left behind. UNDP is committed to building inclusive societies and national systems where the rights of migrants are recognized and upheld, allowing them to contribute meaningfully to societies of both origin and destination. This is even more pressing as climate change impacts worsen and as the empowering but also disempowering facets of digital transformations are becoming more apparent. The Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024 provides a state of play in this regard. We know from the report and from today's distinguished panel that challenges remain, and quite a lot of them. Challenges relating to the precarious status of refugees, to informality, to gendered discrimination, to barriers to services, to social security, to the high cost of remittances, and to the compounding impacts of climate change on existing vulnerabilities of migrants. We could go on, but there are also many positive examples that are worth mentioning, showing how migration has development gains, both in countries of origin and in countries of destination. Allow me to point to a small box on page 96 of the report being launched today. There's one such example, and that is from a village named Serang Madiri, which has seen remarkable growth driven by remittances. These remittances were used collectively by residents to unlock the economic potential of Seram Mandiri through the establishment and expansion of village-owned enterprises, which have seen consistently increasing revenues and gains being channeled back to migrants and returnees who invested. This example of a community coming together as a whole to harness the potential of migration and build opportunities at home exemplifies only one way migration can be a force for development. The International Migrants' Day and the upcoming regional review of the Global Compact provide an opportunity to reflect upon many other examples and to acknowledge the dynamic and integral role of migration in the growth of communities and nations. As we move into this regional review, it is essential for us that we take a long-term perspective, anticipating migration as a part of development and adaptation planning, working across government and society to ensure, one, that migration remains a choice wherever possible, two, that migrant rights are always protected, and three, the potential of migration is harnessed for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. With that, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Trogman, for your words. Finally, I would like to invite Ms. Christine Arab, Regional Director of UN Women, Asia and the Pacific, and UN Women Representative to the Kingdom of Thailand, to deliver her closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I will be brief because I know the day is almost at an end. I want to thank June and Geert for being up here, and I want to really congratulate ESCAP and the UN Interagency Committee and the civil society stakeholders and workers who have helped contribute to this, and hats off to IOM and the chairmanship of this. As we said, we're only a few weeks away from marking the work of the CGM. And I think this captures a lot of the progress made. It's essential, as Hert said, we've all worked in countries that rely on remittances, and we've all worked in countries where we are the senders of the migrants. And despite our best efforts, when any form of crisis happens, they are seldom the first that we think of when we are trying to respond. And if you add into that the lack of status that women can have, both in their own societies and visitors to other societies, you're working very much from an uphill battle. Having said that, protecting women is not the only role that we do. And as June rightly mentioned, through the support of the European Union under ILO's leadership, we have a large joint program focused on protecting safe and fair migration. However, we need to empower women migrants. And the Ambassador Kazi said very well, this is a crucial opportunity for women and men, if governed well, and if human rights throughout are protected. And I would urge as UN Women that we avoid protectionist approaches for women in migration and adopt strong empowerment approaches for women in migration so that their economic opportunities are not limited in any way. I want to really commend the report for capturing the progress. And as Deepa said, much better than I, there's been important progress. When we see economic downturns, when we see protracted conflict, and when we see perpetual impact of climate change, that progress is always at risk. And so on behalf of UN Women, I want to commend the speakers today and the hard work and remind us all that we still have a lot of work to do. And I look forward to hearing what the GCM has to say in early February. And I want to wish you all a happy Migrants' Day. And for those of you who celebrate, happy holidays. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Ms. Arab, for your contributions and your powerful concluding remarks. And dear colleagues, participants, with that, our event draws to a close. It was a pleasure to hear your insightful contributions and learn about your dedicated work this afternoon. I am particularly excited to again announce the official online publication of the Asia-Pacific Migration Report 2024. With print copies very soon forthcoming. And I hope you continue these conversations, and in the interest of such a thing, I am very pleased to invite you all to join us for refreshments outside. Thank you. Thank you.